Build an altar of acacia wood, 3 cubits high. It is to be square, 5 cubits long and 5 cubits wide. Make a horn at each of the 4 corners, so that the horns and the altar are of one piece. Make a bronze basin, with it a bronze stand for washing. Place it between the tent of meeting and the altar, and put water in it. Make a table of acacia wood 2 cubits long, a cubit wide, and a cubit and a half high. Overlay it with pure gold, and make a gold molding around it. Make an altar of acacia wood for burning incense. It is to be square, a cubit long and a cubit wide, and 2 cubits high.
Shalom, shalom, and welcome to Treasured Inheritance Ministry. I'm Yosef Ben Avram, and you've joined me today for part 2, the long overdue part 2 of the Schoolmaster, and we're going to be looking at the trips of Moshe. Now, before we start, I'd just like to say the following, that there's more than 7 trips that Moshe makes up the mountain, and you need to go and read that out for yourself. But we will be specifically looking at 7, because up until that point, it is very important to understand from number 1 all the way to number 7 what exactly is going on. Now, as you could see in the introduction, I had a specific slide that said, thank you to Brother Kirk Carmichael. And before we start, I'd just like to say to him, thank you. Thank you for allowing me the privilege to use your work. Thank you for allowing me the privilege to have a look at it. As I studied the shadow and as I studied what the Father was saying, I had this idea in my mind, and I asked the Father, when exactly was the tabernacle given? Because today we are having discussions, and we are having people who are arguing that there is this dichotomy of Book of the Covenant, Book of the Law, and then there are others that are saying, no, there isn't. And I am one of those that stand on the fact that the Book of the Covenant, Book of the Law dichotomy and cookie-cut sections of it does not make sense. And when we have a look at everything in perspective, and we understand, as we said in part 1, that the Schoolmaster has been given as a guide to bring us to maturity, and we look at the tabernacle structure, and we see how Yeshua was the way, the truth, and the life, then we will understand the trips of Moshe, and we will better understand what Yeshua came to do, that he was the prophet that was coming, that would reconcile everything. And if we do not understand the structure of that wilderness tabernacle as a picture of that which is in heaven, then we will not understand the work of Messiah Yeshua as he redeems us and reconciles us back to the Father. Furthermore, we'll also not understand the importance of covenant and the different kinds of covenant. And neither will we understand the different time periods that our Father has been working in. from the very beginning right up until the end. So, brothers and sisters, I pray that this teaching will really, really bless you, and it's an honor and a privilege to be able to present it to you. And I pray that you will go through it, listen to it once, go back, listen to it again. And as we continue with part 3 and part 4 and part 5, I believe that it's really, really going to bless you and that it will speak to your heart. So before we start, let's pray. Father Yahweh, we want to thank you today in the name of Yeshua. Father, that even though we go through trials and tribulation, Father, your word says that we are hard pressed, but we are not crushed. That we, Father, shall rise, and that we shall rise in the power and the spirit of Abba, Father, in our lives. And I thank you for that. Thank you, Father, that as we commit our way into you, that you are the one that makes our paths straight. And Father, I want to pray for that today. I want to pray, Yahweh, that our paths will be straight, that our eyes will see, and that our ears will hear. And Father, that we will study to show ourselves approved, but more importantly, Father, that the studying of your word will cause us to become people, Father, that bear the very image of our King upon this earth, that we will be true light bearers in a generation of utter darkness and total decay. Help us to be those people, Father, as we surrender our lives to you and as we walk in your ways. And we thank you for this. In Messiah Yeshua's name we pray. Amen. Now, brothers and sisters, I really going to urge you that you really need to have your Bible with you for this specific teaching. And like I said, you're going to have to go backwards and you're going to have to listen to it over and over, as there's a lot of information that we need to cover. And I'm not one of those kind of people that always figure everything out on my own. What actually happened was I was trying to do this teaching and I was praying and I was asking the Father, when exactly was the tabernacle given to Moshe? And I don't know how, but by Yahweh's grace and mercy, I found the brother Kirk, and he had already done most of this already. And it was just an honor to get to know him, an honor to speak to him, and to see his heart and to see where he's coming from. And I believe, as I've said over and over in all the teachings, that we need to be doing this. This is why I have reached out to other brethren and I've begun to speak to others, because we on our own, I on my own, do not have all answers. But as we come together and we hear one another, then we get a refined message, a message I believe that Yahweh's Ruach prompts, and we begin to fit the pieces together. And then we are able to present a more refined message as Yahweh wants us to. So, brothers and sisters, let's turn to the book of Exodus, and we're going to be looking at Exodus chapter 19, verse 5 to 6. And if you've looked on our website, then you'll know that this is one of the scriptures that is all over. It's on the email and it's at the bottom of the website too. And this is the place, brothers and sisters, where Moshe receives the offer. He receives the offer from Yahweh for Israel to become Yahweh's chosen possession. And it says in Exodus chapter 19, verse 5 to 6, "Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant," and we need to take note that there's a dual-fold proclamation given here. It says, if you will obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Now we know that that was the initial offer, that if they obeyed his voice and kept his covenant, so the voice that they would hear, brothers and sisters, is something that they needed to obey, but they also needed to keep his covenant. In other words, his statutes and his judgments over and above that which would be spoken. And many people understand that that which was spoken was the 10 words, or better translated, as many would call it, the 10 commandments. Now, many people don't understand that there is much more, as we have said throughout these teachings, to just the 10 commandments, because it says that Abraham kept Yahweh's statutes, commandments, and his judgments. In other words, he kept everything. The only difference is that he never had the earthly tabernacle and the priesthood. But everything else is exactly the same, because it says in Yahweh's word that Abraham kept his statutes, his judgments, and his commandments. And when it speaks about Moshe, it uses exactly the same Hebrew words, that Moshe kept his statutes, his commandments, and his judgments. Now, there is a threefold thing here that Abba Father says to his children. Firstly, we need to understand that he says to his children that they would be a special treasured possession, that they would be his chosen people, Then it goes on to say that they would be a kingdom of priests. Now, we need to understand and define what that actually means. That is not what so many people think today when they say, oh, but the husband is the priest in the house. We need to understand, brothers and sisters, to be a priest means that you're one who serves Elohim as well as serves man. This was the desire of all Israel, for them to serve Yahweh and thereby to have his image upon them so that they could show him forth to a generation out there, to a world that was a mess. Then he goes on and he says that they would be a set-apart nation. They would be set apart from the world. They would be his own treasured possession, and they would be serving him in spirit and in truth, and thereby they would understand and they would have a heart to know who he was. Brothers and sisters, do you understand what is being said in these passages? How important it is that we understand that to be a priest means that you have moved from death to life, that you have had a total heart change. This is what it means. And this is why Peter understood this. And he says it in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9. He says, but you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. In other words, a set-apart nation. His own special people. In other words, his treasured possession. Just like it was said in Exodus. Now in Messiah Yeshua, we are able to be reconciled in order to become those priests. But we need to understand the difference between being a child and being a true son and daughter. So many people today are saying, oh, but you know, I am a priest. I am a priest. I'm walking in the ways of Yahweh. But they are still living in places of death. So it says, his own special people. We cannot expect to be a priest that serves Yahweh if we're still in the outer court. And we're going to look at that as we go on in these teachings. What exactly was found in that outer court? What exactly was found in the holy place? What exactly was found in the Holy of Holies? And how that relates to our walk of spiritual maturity, of becoming perfect in him, and how Messiah Yeshua's death and resurrection opened that way for you to go from the outside into the Holy of Holies. Be reconciled with the Father, because that's where he is. That's why this earthly tabernacle is of so much importance. Now the question is, where did Peter get this idea that we can become this chosen generation, a royal priesthood, and a holy nation? He understood the covenant plan. He understood maturity. He understood what it meant from the beginning with the Abrahamic covenant, the Mosaic, as well as the inheritance. He understood that. He understood that throughout Scripture there has been a covenantal plan for Yahweh to redeem his people so that they might become what? The inheritors of that promise. That hasn't happened, and it will happen at the end. So basically what happens here is that the offer for Israel to become his chosen generation, in other words, Yahweh's chosen and treasured possession and a royal priesthood, it is renewed. How? It gets renewed through Messiah Yeshua. It is a renewal of that original plan, but you still have to move from death to life. It doesn't mean just because you're saved that you're automatically a priest. And this is the problem today. Many people are teaching on the Melchizedekian priesthood, but they are not teaching discipleship, they are not teaching maturity, and they are not understanding the tabernacle structure as a model of being reconciled to the Father. How we need to shed our garments, how we need to get rid of everything that is defiled, how we need to give ourselves as a living sacrifice. Brothers and sisters, this is so important to understand. It is so important to understand. So now let's have a look at what happens at the bottom of the mountain. In Exodus chapter 19, 7-8, it tells us that Moses went down. He comes down from the mountain and he brings this offer to the elders and the people. And it is here that the people reply so quickly without even thinking about what they're doing. They say, hey, you know what? It's okay. Everything Yahweh says, we're going to obey it. And it becomes their acceptance. They make a vow. They make a vow with their mouths and they say, hey, you know what? Everything Yahweh says, we're going to obey. It's cool. We're going to do it. And it's at this point that we see trip number 2. It's found in Exodus chapter 19, verse 8-13. And it says the following, and all the people answered together and said, all that Yahweh has spoken, we shall do. Right there they say, hey, you know what, guys? We're going to do this, man. We're going to do what he tells us, and we're going to do it with all our heart. But we know that didn't happen. So Moshe brought back the words of the people to Yahweh. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, See, I am coming to you in a thick cloud, so that the people hear when I speak with you, and believe you forever. And Moshe reported the words of the people to Yahweh. He's putting his seal upon Moshe. And then it says, And Yahweh said to Moshe, Go to the people and set them apart today and tomorrow. In other words, set them apart today and tomorrow for 2 days. And on the third day, it says, And then wash their garments, and I shall be prepared, and they shall be prepared by what? By the third day. Hosea chapter 6 talks about, I will gather you for 2 days, and on the third day, I will raise you up so that you can stand before me. But what does it mean? It means that you need to wash your garments. Exactly like it is written here. Types and foreshadows are found all over the scriptures. But people don't want to see it. You see, brothers and sisters, for 2,000 years, from the beginning of Messiah Yeshua's death and resurrection, he has been reconciling us to the Father in the hope that one day we will be able to stand before the King of Kings, and that he will look at us and say, Well done, my good and faithful servant. You kept your garments clean. Come and sit down. Come and sit down at the wedding table. Come and sit down and feast with me. But yet so many people, brothers and sisters, think that they're already there, and they're walking around with garments that are defiled. Then in verse 12 it says, And you shall make a border for the people all around, saying, Take heed to not to touch. It says, Take heed to yourselves that you do not go up the mountain or touch the border of it. What happened to Uzziah when he touched the ark of Yahweh? He died. So many people today want the status of being priests, and they want the status of having Yahweh's presence, but they're not willing to count the cost. And that cost, brothers and sisters, means a sacrificed life. That's why Rabbi Shmuel says it continually. Present yourself as a living sacrifice. And the sacrifice was right in the beginning of that tabernacle, so that you may know the good, the pleasing, and the perfect. The different sections of the tabernacle is what Rabbi Shmuel is talking about. The different walks or different stations of spiritual maturity. He understood it. He understood it because he understood covenant. That's why he said, before you can become the perfect person, you need to do what? Present yourself as a living sacrifice right there at the altar. You need to put yourself on it daily. Can you honestly say that you've been doing that? So it's at this point that Moshe then brings the people's acceptance back to Yahweh. He goes and he brings their acceptance back to Yahweh because, pardon me, they've said now that they will do everything that Yahweh says. So he goes back up the mountain. And Moses is told that Yahweh will come in a dense cloud and speak to Moshe so that the people will always put their trust in him. In other words, he's putting his seal upon Moshe. And it's in this passage that he's instructed then to bring the people back on the third day. As I said, Hosea chapter 6 tells us this, that on the third day he will raise us up. It's on this third day, brothers and sisters, that the wedding takes place. That's also what's going to happen at the end. 2,000 years, on the third is going to be the wedding. So he instructs them to consecrate themselves. In other words, to keep themselves pure and to wash their clothes, change their garments, and then to put limits for the people around the mountain. Why? Because if you touch the presence of Yahweh in your messed up state, in your sinful flesh, you shall die. Because it says, Rabbi Shmuel says that corruption cannot inherit incorruption. We need to have a physical, bodily change. So he tells the people and he warns them not to touch the foot on the mountain or they will die. They can only approach the mountain and draw close when they hear the ram's horn blown. Brothers and sisters, this is only speaking and it's proclaiming festival time. The ram's horn, the shofar. So at the bottom of the mountain, it begins the preparation for the wedding. In other words, the changing of the garments and everything begins to get ready for the people now to become betrothed to Yahweh. And Exodus chapter 19 verse 14 to 20 tells us, and it says, And Moshe came down from the mountain to the people and set the people apart, and they washed their garments, changing our status. And he said to the people, Be prepared by the third day. 1 day is like 1,000 years. It says, Do not come near a wife. And it came to be on the third day in the morning that there was thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain. And we've spoken about this already. Yahweh descends on that mountain with power. Something that we're missing today. And it says, and the sound of the ram's horn was very loud, and all the people who were in the camp trembled. And Moshe brought the people out of the camp to meet with Elohim, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. And Mount Sinai was in smoke, all of it. Every single part of that mountain was on fire, because Yahweh descended upon it in fire. Can you imagine this picture? And its smoke went up like the smoke of a furnace, and all the mountain trembled exceedingly. And when the blast of the ram's horn sounded long and became louder and louder, Moshe spoke and Elohim answered him by voice. You see, brothers and sisters, we need to understand that so many people get so focused on Torah readings and Torah readings and Torah study, but they are lacking hearing the voice of Yahweh because they lack an intimate relationship with their King. And Yahweh came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain, and Yahweh called Moshe up to the top of the mountain. And Moshe went up. So what do we see in this passage? Firstly, what we need to notice is that Moshe, he goes down and he's instructed to consecrate the people by having them wash their clothes, changing of their status, changing of their garments, and to prepare themselves for the third day. Brothers and sisters, we have been given 2,000 years. It's called sanctification. The time is coming, brothers and sisters, where he wants to raise us up. He wants to raise up that remnant that has listened, the first harvest. So he has them wash their clothes and prepare themselves for the third day, that day of the wedding, and abstain from sexual relations. And it was on the morning of the third day that there was thunder and lightning and the trumpet, the shofar blast. And it signaled to the people that the mountain was now there, that Yahweh was on the mountain. And it was time for the wedding. And it was time, brothers and sisters, it's time. Because the bridegroom was there. He was the one that has brought these people out of Egypt to be what? To be his set apart people. That's what it says in the word. For you were once darkness, but you are now light, and I have brought you out. I have taken you out of those places. Yet some people still choose to go back. And it's here, brothers and sisters, that they trembled in the camp. Can you imagine Yahweh descending like fire upon a mountain? The mountain is shaking. And the people began to tremble in the camp. Can you... I'm sorry, but I'm just imagining this in my mind. How it must have been. So Moshe leads the people out of the camp and he brings them to the foot of Mount Sinai. And the shofar sounds, it grew louder and louder. And Moshe spoke and Yahweh answers him. And it's here that Yahweh descends on Mount Sinai and he calls Moshe up. This is, brothers and sisters, trip number 3. He's now been already 2 times and this is now the 3rd time. Very, very important to understand. Let's have a look at what happens in trip number 3. In Exodus chapter 19, from verse 20 to 24, it says, And Yahweh came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain. And Yahweh called Moshe to the top of the mountain, and Moshe went up. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, Go down and warn the people, lest they break through unto Yahweh to see, and many of them fall. Remember, we cannot come into the presence of Yahweh in our fallen state. That is why we need his Ruach to change us continually so that we can be that living sacrifice, because it's his fire in us that burns in us and helps us to present ourselves as a living sacrifice. That's why so many people today cannot present themselves as a living sacrifice, because they don't have fire in them. This is a very, very serious thing. It's the fire of Yahweh that purifies us. It's the fire of Yahweh that brings things to the surface so that we can lay them down on his altar. And Moshe said to Yahweh, The people are not able to come up to Mount Sinai, for you warned us, saying, Make a border around the mountain and set it apart. And Yahweh said to him, Come, go down and then come up, you and Aaron with you. Very, very important. So now he tells him, hey, you know what? Go back down and get Aaron and then you come back. And he says, but do not let the priests and the people break through to come up to Yahweh, lest he break out against them, the priests. Very, very interesting here. We know that that hasn't happened yet, that the priesthood hasn't been elected yet. But it says, but do not let the priests and the people break through to come up to Yahweh, lest he break out against them. And Moshe went down to the people and spoke to them. Now this is very, very important. It is at this point, brothers and sisters, that Moshe is called up. He's called up to Yahweh for the final wedding preparation. But it's at this point, brothers and sisters, that the people shrink back in fear. They shrink so far back in fear that it's absolutely crazy to think. So Moshe went up by Moses. It says that Moses went up, and then he goes up and he speaks, and he says to Yahweh that we are all here. And Yahweh replies to Moses, and he said that he would show these people his power. And it's here that the people get exceedingly afraid. They back away. You see, we read even more of how afraid Moshe was in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 21. It says, so terrifying was the sight that Moshe said, I am exceedingly afraid and trembling. This man who had already seen the burning bush was now even more afraid. It's at this point that Moshe was told by Yahweh, go back down. Go down and warn the people so that they do not force their way up the mountain to see Yahweh, or they will die. And then like I said, remember the fact that now Aaron is being called up. And what's important in all of this is that Yahweh had already spoken to Aaron earlier before with Moshe, and he had spoken to him and said that he would be the spokesperson for the people. Remember, Moshe said that he was slow in speech in Exodus chapter 4, verse 10 and 16. So Aaron is to act as a spokesperson for the people. Now at the bottom of the mountain, this is where it gets interesting. It's at the bottom of the mountain that the wedding time arrives, and the bride sends Moshe in place of themselves. They are supposed to be the ones standing at the edge of the mountain. They are the ones that are supposed to be getting married to Yahweh, but instead they get exceedingly afraid and they back away. And they send Moshe. Let's read it in Exodus chapter 20, verse 18. It says, and all the people saw the thunders, the lightning flashes, the sound of the ram's horn, and the mountain smoking. And the people saw it, and they trembled and stood at a distance. Isn't this exactly what happens so often when we see the power and the presence of Yahweh, or something happens in our lives? Instead of moving forward, we tend to step backwards. That is why the second place in the tabernacle is called the place of decision. After you accept that sacrifice that is there on that altar, and you get mikved into the name of Yeshua, and you accept his ruach in your life, things are bound to get heavier. Things are bound to get hectic. So many people back away from the refinement. They back away from the fire. So in verse 19 it says, so instead they said to Moshe, you speak with us and we hear. But let not Elohim speak with us lest we die. Because if he's going to speak to us, we are going to die. Now Moshe reiterated this entire scenario, or this entire occurrence in Deuteronomy chapter 5 verse 23. It says, and it came to be when you heard the voice from the midst of the darkness, while the mountain was burning with fire, that you came near to me, all the heads of your tribes and your elders, and said, see, Yahweh our Elohim has shown us his esteem and his greatness, and we have heard his voice from the midst of the fire. Today we have seen that Elohim speaks with man, and he lives. And now why should we die? For this great fire is consuming us. If we hear the voice of Yahweh our Elohim any more, then we shall die. Man, if they only understood there what he was wanting to give them. For who is there of all flesh who has heard the voice of the living Elohim speaking from the midst of the fire, as we have and does live? You go near and hear all that Yahweh your Elohim says, and speak to us all that Yahweh our Elohim says to you, and we shall hear and do it. And Yahweh heard the voice of your words when you spoke to me. And Yahweh said to me, I have heard the voice of the words of this people, which they have spoken to you. They have done well in all that they have spoken. Verse 29, oh, that they should have such a heart in them to fear me and to guard all of my commands always. Not just part of it, all of my commands, my statutes, my decrees, and my commands, so that it might be well with them and with their children forever. Go say to them, return to your tents. Why? They need to be separated now. They have to be separated because they are so fearful. But you stand here by me, and let me speak to you all the commands, not just the 10 words, not just the book of the covenant, all the commands, all the laws, all the right rulings, which you are to teach them, and they shall do them in the land which I am giving them to possess. There it is written, brothers and sisters, commands, statutes, and decrees, everything. And this is where we seem to be making a distinction. And by doing this, we are sowing confusion. And so many people have emailed me and said, thank you, Brother Yosef, that you are explaining these things. Because so many people that have been following the book of the covenant, book of the law, they still do not know what laws they are supposed to keep and what they aren't. Because there's no clear cut in this entire dichotomy. Right here, Moshe says it very clearly. He says, and Yahweh says to him, you shall stand here by me, and I shall speak to you all the commands and the laws and the right rulings. Remember, brothers and sisters, that the 10 commandments was written by Yahweh's hand. Now he's speaking to him everything else, the Torah of the Torah. This is very important to understand. So let's recap and see what this is saying. So Moshe went down to the people, and after they had seen the thunder as well as the lightning, as well as the smoke, and heard that trumpet, the shofar, it's at that point that they shrank back in fear. As I said, so many people do today. And they stayed at a distance. They didn't want to come closer because they were fearful. And the people said to Moshe when he came back down that they wanted him to speak to them instead of Yahweh. They rather wanted to hear the voice of a mortal over the voice of the great I am. And isn't that exactly today what so many people do? We'll rather listen to the voice of a good teacher or preacher or prophet instead of actually spending time in the presence of Yahweh, finding these things out for ourselves. There's nothing wrong in listening to good teaching, but when it comes to sending someone else on your behalf to hear from the Father, you're in grave danger. We are to be hearing the voice of Yahweh for ourselves. And it comes through intimacy with our King. So the people instead say that they want Moshe to speak to them instead of Yahweh, because they've heard Yahweh speak to Moshe and believed, and they have understood. But they are scared, because if this doesn't happen in this way, they're scared that they might die if he had to directly speak to them. So brothers and sisters, it's at this point that we need to understand something. It's at this very point that the bride does what you would call a no-show. The bride doesn't come to the place where the bridegroom is. Instead, they shrank back. They shrank back and remained at a distance. And this is exactly what occurred just prior to receiving the wedding vows. Just prior to actually receiving what Yahweh wanted to place within their very hearts, they got scared and they decided to go backwards. Nothing's changed, brothers and sisters. The same is happening today. So Yahweh said that it was a good thing actually at this point. He actually says to Moshe that it was a good thing that they were afraid. And how only if their hearts, this is the key that is spoken about in the book of Hebrews, if only their hearts were not of flesh, but if their hearts were open, if their hearts were soft, if their hearts were ready to receive what I was wanting to place within it, that they would truly understand. He says if their hearts would be inclined to fear me and to keep all my commands, my statutes, and my decrees. This is what Yahweh wants. Nothing's changed. He still wants us to keep these things. So it's at this point, brothers and sisters, that Moshe, he told the people to return back to their tents, to go back to their dwelling places. It's at this point, brothers and sisters, that we enter into trip number 4. And it's found in Exodus chapter 20, verse 21. And it's the actual giving of the 10 commandments, or the 10 words. And it's commonly called the Book of the Covenant. But what many people don't understand is that the Book of the Covenant is actually the 10 words. But it is also the statutes and decrees that Yahweh had told Moshe, hey, you know what? You stand here because I'm about to tell you the statutes, the commands, as well as the decrees. So those who hold to a Book of the Covenant, Book of the Law, they say that this is the 10 commandments. And they go so far to say that on the 10 commandments was written over 1,200 words. Which I do not agree. So we find this in Deuteronomy chapter 4, 12 to 14, as well as Deuteronomy 18, 16 to 18. And it's also within these passages, brothers and sisters, that we need to understand that it is in these specific passages of Deuteronomy that Yahweh gives the announcement to Moshe of the prophet to come after him, the one who would reconcile all things and help. In other words, he's speaking about Yeshua. So at this point, the wedding continues. It continues without the bride standing anywhere close to the bridegroom. They are no longer standing at the place of the mountain foot. Instead, Moshe is now the mediator of the terms and conditions. He becomes the mediator of the terms and conditions. And that's a very, very important word to remember, mediator. You see, brothers and sisters, a mediator is the one who stands. So Yeshua is the mediator of a better covenant. He's the mediator between Yahweh and Israel. He's not the mediator between Joe Soap. He's the mediator between his people still and Yahweh. He's the one that stands in the middle. It's not a different covenant. It's the same covenant, a different mediator, because the mediator is the one that helps the people understand the terms and conditions. So the people had already left the wedding location. We know that they've now already gone and they've left back to their tents. And they left in fear. They left in fear, and Moshe tells them, he says, go back to your tents. And it's at this point that Moshe now goes back up on trip number 4. And Aaron is not with him as instructed in trip number 3. Remember, we said that Aaron was to be the spokesperson. Yahweh had already instructed him that was going to be his role. But now we see, as Moshe goes back up, that Aaron is not with him, as he was told to be with him in trip number 3. And Brother Kirk says that it can be assumed by this that Aaron shrank back with fear. And I agree. I believe that Aaron shrank back in fear with the rest of the people. And he is supposed to play a highly influential role. So let's get back. It's at this point that the wedding is already, it's ready and it's time, brothers and sisters, for the wedding to take place. But we have no bride. And we have no spokesperson because Aaron is not there for the people. So it's at this point that we can see already that the original plan that Yahweh instituted is about to take a different direction. It has to take a different direction because things are not the way that it should have been. They are not standing at the place that they should have been. Aaron is not there as the spokesperson either. Now it's at this point that Yahweh comes up with an alternative plan. He comes up with an alternative plan to still marry and dwell with his people. And in these people, as I keep saying, they are so scared. They are so afraid in their flesh because their flesh is sinful. So the wedding does take place with the bride at a far distance back at their tents, as Moshe stands on the mountain as a mediator between Yahweh and the people, exactly the same thing that Yeshua does on our behalf. And it's at this point that Yahweh speaks the wedding vows. He speaks them audibly. He speaks the wedding vows, which is mistranslated, brothers and sisters, as the 10 Commandments. It actually should be the 10 words. The ketubah. It's the ketubah, the marriage vows for his people. And it's at this point that we need to understand that there comes this clear separation between the presence of Yahweh and the people. Why? Because the people have rejected Yahweh out of fear. That is what happens, brothers and sisters. When we reject Yahweh, there comes a separation. Not only when we reject him, but when sin enters. When sin enters in, there is always going to be a wall. So as such, Yahweh's alternative plan is now to divide himself from the people. So the reason why he does this is because he still wants to dwell with them. But he has to now be barricaded off. He has to be near to them, but still at a distance from them. And this is where it gets very, very interesting. You see, brothers and sisters, when we make this distinction of Book of the Covenant, Book of the Law, and we make the distinction and we cut it where they say the cut is supposed to be, then we land up with all kinds of different problems. For one, many people now today will say, don't give me anything Levitical. And even when they look at the earthly tabernacle, they think that it is Levitical, yet it is not. It is heavenly. It is not a Levitical temple. It is a heavenly temple, and it is the pattern of what is in heaven. And many people think that this was given after what was taken place in Exodus. Yet when we take a look and we have a closer look and we see what is going on, we come to understand that at this point, brothers and sisters, at this specific trip, it is here that Moshe receives this heavenly pattern. Let me read to you what is written here. As such, Yahweh's alternative plan is now to divide himself from the people to allow being with them in their proximity, but he has to be barricaded off. In other words, they have to build the tabernacle. And it's during the next trip, trip number 5. And trip number 5, in essence, or actually, takes place for 40 days as he goes up. Moshe goes up onto the mountain for 40 days on trip 5. And it's on trip number 5 that Moshe is shown the pattern of the heavenly. He is shown the tabernacle structure to build according to the pattern that he was given. He has to build this tabernacle according to the pattern that is in heaven. And what we need to understand is that this was a copy and a shadow of what is in heaven. That's what it says in Hebrews chapter 8 verse 5. And it is also a picture of the one to come from heaven, which is Messiah Yeshua. He is the tabernacle. And if we understand that, then we will understand that Messiah Yeshua was being given in the structure of the tabernacle to the people to help them to atone for their sins so that there could come reconciliation. You see, brothers and sisters, when we look at trip number 5, we begin to understand that trip number 5 is all about Yeshua. Because when we connect the dots together and then we begin to see what law and commandments was given, then we are told that he is given the heavenly pattern. But he's also told the following. He says later in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 15 to 16, he says the same thing that Peter reiterates in the New Testament. And he says, and Yahweh, your Elohim, will raise up for you a prophet like me from your midst, from your brethren. Him you shall hear according to all you desired of Yahweh your Elohim in Horeb in the day of the assembly. The day of the assembly means on the day that I wanted to marry you, saying, let me not hear again the voice of Yahweh my Elohim, nor let me see this great fire any more, lest I die. So let's take a look at these words that Moshe gives in this entire passage. Firstly, what he does say is he says, guys, there's going to come a prophet. There's going to come a greater prophet. He's going to be the one that will reconcile man to Yahweh. There's going to come this prophet in the future. And we know that this prophet is Yeshua because Peter quotes it in Acts chapter 3, verse 22. But what many people don't understand is that the timing of this statement was 40 years earlier in Horeb. In other words, where Mount Sinai was. And it was on the day of the assembly. In other words, it was on the day that they should have married him. It was on the day of the wedding. And that is what's happening here on trip number 4. Now, to further peg the timing of the statement, it was the trip before, on trip number 3, that the people rejected Yahweh by saying, let me not hear again the voice of Yahweh, or we will die. And so instead, they sent Moshe back up in trip number 4 instead. And brothers and sisters, what we need to understand is that we need to enter the story at this specific moment. And as we do, we need to realize what is occurring with the promised prophet that's going to come. You see, the fear of the bride in their fleshly state is what is meant in Hebrews chapter 8, verse 7. Because of their fear and because of their flesh, their heart was fleshly and they were not able to receive this marriage ketubah. So Yahweh says that he found fault with the people. Not fault with his covenant, not fault with his ketubah, not fault with his terms and conditions, but fault with them because they were fleshly. And it's for this reason that John chapter 1 verse 14 says that the word became flesh and dwelt among them. The word was dwelling among them, as the prophet like Moses to come would come and dwell among us. So now they have an earthly tabernacle for what reason? So that Yahweh may dwell among them. You see, brothers and sisters, it's the prophet that comes, Messiah Yeshua. He's the one that will cause the people to put faith in him and thereby to be reconciled. In other words, to be born again. And as he does this and we yield to his ruach and we move from death to life, he will begin to put his laws upon our heart. And the ultimate fulfillment of that will be at the end of days. I hope you're starting to understand these things. So Yahweh speaks his covenant. In other words, he speaks his terms and conditions. And we need to understand that these 10 words is his very image. It's the express image of a loving father. It's the things that he desires for us to be. It's the terms and conditions of the original oral plan. These are the things, brothers and sisters, that will be written on our hearts in that new covenant, that will be fulfilled at the end of days. It gets written on those who are born again and those who are walking by his Ruach as we yield to his spirit and to his voice. Now let's have a look at what it says. Firstly, it says, I am Yahweh your Elohim, who brought you out of Egypt. Have no other gods and make no idols. Do not take the name of Yahweh your Elohim in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it set apart, holy. Honor your father and mother. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not bear false witness. Do not covet your neighbor's possessions. You know, it's at this point, brothers and sisters, that many people get this all wrong. You see, he's given the 10 words, but he's also given the statutes and the decrees and the judgments, which many people now label and they say the book of the covenant, which in essence is going to become all one scroll. He's given the book of the covenant, all those things that Yahweh said to him, stand here and I'm going to tell you, which is found in Exodus chapter 21 to 23. This, brothers and sisters, was the initial statutes and decrees of the first covenant. In other words, the book of the covenant was given to Moshe on his 4th trip to give instructions, in other words, guidelines to the people. And he was told how to administer, in other words, how to help the people learn and understand the covenant, the 10 words, so that they could be a Kodesh people, a community of people. Why? Because like we have said before, for the first time since the history of Adam, the entire nation is now entering into covenant with Yahweh. And this book of the covenant, all its laws, decrees, and statutes, minus that sacrificial system and the priesthood. All of these things, brothers and sisters, are being given to the people. Why? So that they might dwell with Yahweh. Nothing has changed. It's exactly the same book, minus the priesthood and the sacrificial system. This is exactly the same as what Abraham kept. And we need to understand it. It's not just the 10 Commandments or the Book of the Covenant. That's not what it means. It's everything, brothers and sisters, that Yahweh gave to Moshe. And we learn from the Schoolmaster. Yes, we don't have a Levitical priesthood today. But by looking at the Levitical priesthood and the roles that the priesthood played, we begin to understand the importance of changing our garments. We begin to understand the structure of the earthly tabernacle as a picture of Messiah Yeshua's life and how we are supposed to come back into union with him. Now take note that Moshe speaks of this trip number 4, and he speaks of it as getting both the 10 words, in other words, the words of the covenant, as well as the book of the covenant. But he speaks about it and he says that it happened 40 years later here. And he says it in the book of Deuteronomy. Let me read it to you. In Deuteronomy, which happened to be 40 years later, he says, so he declared to you his covenant, which he commanded you to perform. The 10 words, the 10 commandments, and he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone. And Yahweh commanded me at that time to teach you statutes and judgment, the Torah of the Torah, that you might observe them in the land which you cross over to possess. You see, in order for us to possess the land, we need to be walking in all of Yahweh's Torah. That's why we need to go from just the Abrahamic into the Mosaic and then into sons and daughters of inheritance so that we might inherit the land. I hope you're beginning to understand this. So what he's actually saying in Deuteronomy chapter 4, 13 to 14 is he says that he spoke his covenant, which is the 10 words. And at that time, in other words, at the time of the speaking of his covenant, Yahweh gave Moshe more laws, Torah. Moshe got statutes and judgments. And many people today have called this the book of the covenant, where in essence it is the original plan. It is the decrees, the commandments, and the statutes that Yahweh had given from the very, very beginning. It is Yahweh's Torah, brothers and sisters, and he had given this to do what? To teach the people how to live as a community, because they had never lived like this before. Now, brothers and sisters, the book of the law is actually a covenant added to the law of Moshe, which was instituted as a result of the sin of the golden calf. In other words, because of the sin of the golden calf, Yahweh added the sacrificial system and the Levitical priesthood. And this is what is so important. It is added because of what? Not because of transgression. It is added because of mercy. It is added to show the people how to now live with Him, how to be reconciled to Him. And it is so important that we understand this. So many people call the book of the law, book of the covenant, and they look at the book of the law and they say, oh, but those things have been imposed, we don't need them. But in essence, the law of Moshe was given to the people as the sacrificial system to atone for each and every sin, as well as the Levitical priesthood to show them how to do what Yahweh intended them to do from the very beginning. And this is why the sacrificial system, the wilderness tabernacle, as well as the Levitical priesthood point us to Messiah Yeshua. They are the schoolmaster teaching us how to grow up in our faith. Now let's go back to Exodus, or go on, and let's go to Exodus chapter 24, 3-8. And it's at the bottom of the mountain now that the people, it's the signature that takes place. In Exodus chapter 24 verse 3 it says, And Moshe came and related to the people all the words of Yahweh and all the right rulings. And all the people answered with one voice and said, All the words which Yahweh has said and spoken we shall do. And Moshe wrote down all the words of Yahweh and rose up early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and 12 standing columns for the 12 tribes of Israel. And he set young men of the children of Israel, and they offered burnt offerings and peace slaughterings of bulls to Yahweh. And Moshe took half the blood and put it in basins, and half the blood he sprinkled on the altar. And he took the book of the covenant, everything, not just the 10 words, everything that he had to write, the statutes, the decrees, the Torah, everything. And he read it in the hearing of the people, and they said, All that Yahweh has spoken we shall do and obey. And Moshe took the blood and sprinkled it on the people and said, See, the blood of the covenant which Yahweh has made with you concerning all these words. So what is happening here? So Moshe goes down and he takes the book of the covenant, he takes that which Yahweh had given him, and he blood ratifies it. In other words, he seals it. It becomes the signature. Why? Because the people have now agreed to the covenant, as well as its statutes and decrees. Everything, the Torah, everything. I'm going to say it again. Everything. So Moshe sprinkles the blood on the book and the people, and the agreement is sealed. It's at this point that Aaron is given this book, as his job now becomes the one to officiate what is written within it among the people, as the spokesperson. And he will be given instructions to do so on the next trip, in trip number 5. It's supposed to be after the marriage supper. After the marriage supper, he is supposed to then become what? The one who becomes the spokesperson to the people, to help them keep everything that Yahweh has told them. I hope you're still with me and it's starting to make more sense. Now let's have a look at trip number 5. Trip number 5 is very important. It's found in Exodus chapter 24 verse 9, Exodus 32:16. And it's at this point that it's halfway. It's halfway that the elders go up. And Moshe and Joshua go the rest of the way for 40 days. And this is where he receives the heavenly pattern of the Messiah. Now that the terms and conditions have been sealed, he now receives this earthly tabernacle that so many people today are saying, hey, but you know what? That's Levitical. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do any part of that. I don't even see the importance of having a look at it, because they refer to the shadow as that which was imposed. But the shadow is actually that which is leading us back to Messiah Yeshua. It is the Levitical priesthood, the tabernacle, the wilderness tabernacle, its furnishings, everything. Let's go on. So it's at this point, pardon me, that Moshe comes up with Joshua as well as the 70 elders. And they have a marriage supper celebration. This is very, very important. It's at this point that we need to also understand that Aaron has the book of the covenant. He has the book that has all the decrees, all the statutes, all the Torah of Yahweh. And it's at this point that Moshe instructs Aaron and the elders to stay where they are. Stay there, don't move, don't go anywhere. And if anybody has a problem, then they're to come up to himself and the elders to receive decisions. Why? Because he now has the book with all the commandments in it. So it's the book that helps him to do what? Right ruling. How are we going to become the magistrates that Yahweh wants us to be at the end of the age if we are not willing, brothers and sisters, to have all of his commandments? If we are going to be making this cut between book of the covenant and book of the law, we are going to miss so much. And we are not going to be a faithful witness. So if the people have a dispute, they are to come up to Aaron, and Aaron is supposed to then do what? Use what he has been given, commonly called the Book of the Covenant, to do what? Make right ruling. But unfortunately, brothers and sisters, we know that Aaron and the people, they blow this big time. As they end up doing what? As we have spoken about in the golden calf, they end up going back down. Why? Because they realize and they think to themselves that Moshe has been raptured. Moshe has been taken and he's not coming back. Probably he's died. So it's at this point, brothers and sisters, that we need to understand that the elders and Aaron, they only went halfway up. Whereas Moshe and Joshua, they go right up to the top and they stay at the top for 40 days and 40 nights. And they enter the cloud for this alternative arrangement of now dividing Yahweh, the bridegroom, from the people who are the bride. And it's at this point that we need to understand that right here now, you see, from the very beginning, if they understood what they were receiving, then Yahweh would have written his laws and his Torah in their hearts. But instead, there has to be an alternative plan. So now there is this division, and Yahweh is now going to give Moshe the pattern of the heavenly so that this reconciliation can come back. In other words, he's going to give them a pattern of Messiah Yeshua, the prophet who's going to come. I hope you're understanding this. Moshe receives the pattern of Messiah. That's how you need to understand this. He receives the pattern of Messiah, the workings of Messiah Yeshua to bring reconciliation between man and Yahweh. So what Moshe receives upon his complete journey for 40 days is called a copy and a shadow. That's what it says in Hebrews chapter 8 verse 5 that we have been saying over and over and over. In Hebrews chapter 8 verse 5, it says that and the writer of Hebrews understands that which was before is like a schoolmaster. He uses it and he teaches from it. We know that it was written and that it was given to Moshe, this pattern, but it was a heavenly pattern. In other words, he was seeing what was in heaven. He was seeing the pattern of Messiah Yeshua. And Messiah Yeshua is the one who's going to come from heaven to reconcile man. So the placement of Hebrews chapter 8 verse 5 shows us this pattern. In other words, it shows us the pattern of that renewed covenant, that which will take place and reconcile us to the Father. Hebrews chapter 8, 8 to 12. Brothers and sisters, you need to understand that the Father is setting the stage for his Son to come, as this pattern will then carry on. It will carry on throughout all generations, that no man can come to the Father except through Messiah Yeshua. This is very, very important. You see, the pattern is shown to Moshe as it is determined that this prophet, in other words, Messiah Yeshua, will come in the future. He will come to die for his bride, and Yeshua will reconcile everything in his flesh. This is so, so important. But instead, what happens? The people at the bottom of the mountain decide to commit adultery before they even receive the written agreement. Even before they receive what Yahweh was going to give to them, they commit adultery. And this is where it gets so, so important to understand what is going on. So many people say, oh, but now the book of the law was given to them and imposed, but this is not what the scriptures tell us. When we take a look at everything, we begin to see the pattern. Because there was a blood covenant that took place, there has to be a death. And we need to understand that. You see, there's punishment and atonement required for a broken blood ratified covenant. Exodus chapter 32, 17 to 35, Deuteronomy 9, 7 to 21. You see, brothers and sisters, because they broke covenant, there has to be punishment. So while near day 40 on the mountain, round about day 40, it's at this point that that Moshe comes back down the mountain with 2 stone tablets in his hand. It's at this point that Moshe is told, go down, for the people have corrupted themselves and made gods before them, saying, these are the ones who took them out of Egypt. They made an idol, and they said, oh, but this is the one that brought us out of Egypt, a golden calf. I mean, come on. It's sad. Anyway, so Yahweh was going to destroy the people and make a nation from Moshe. And it's at this point that we need to understand that Moshe is a type of Yeshua, and he acts as that. And what does he do? He acts as an intercessor. He intercedes by pleading, and he pleads on what? On that unconditional blood covenant that Yahweh made with Abraham. That is why in Genesis it tells us that you cannot add to an already blood ratified covenant. Why? Because it is referencing Abraham. It's not referencing what happened at Mount Sinai. It's referencing the fact that Moshe understood this, and he cried out to Yahweh and said, but you promised Abraham. You promised Abraham that you would make this people great, that they would possess the land. So he pleads on that unconditional blood covenant. And Yahweh relents from destroying them. Now imagine for a second and understand this. Now he's coming down the mountain. He's been in the presence of Yahweh for 40 days. This man is on fire. And he comes down the mountain and he sees the people singing and dancing and doing all kinds of lewd and licentious acts. And they're dancing around this golden calf. Wouldn't you be angry? I believe he was so angry. And he shatters the stone tablets, breaking that covenant that Yahweh made. He breaks it right there and then. Now, brothers and sisters, it's at this point that we need to understand that this specific event that took place, the breaking of the covenants, as well as the golden calf, is very, very crucial to our understanding of the next 2 trips. Because then we will only understand what exactly is going on. You see, most Torah people, they commonly miss the point of what is going on. And they make this distinction, and they say that Torah is the first 5 books of Moshe. But we have already defined that Torah is not just the first 5 books of Moshe. Torah is everything from Genesis all the way through to Revelation. It is all of Yahweh's instructions. It is everything that Yahweh has given for righteous living and holy living. We need to understand that. So it's at this point, if you've listened to the teaching on the golden calf, that you'll come to understand. It's at this point that what happens? Moshe comes down, he sees the golden calf, he gets angry, and he calls out and he says, who is on Yahweh's side? Exactly the same as Elijah. If you are for Baal, go and stand with Baal. If you are for Yahweh, then come and stand for Yahweh. There will always be a remnant. It's at this point that we need to understand that almost everybody stands on the side of death. Whereas Yahweh then says through Moshe, who is on Yahweh's side? And it's the Levites that step forward. They are the ones that step forward. And they get told to do what? To kill all their brothers with swords. Why? Because it is a sign of a broken blood covenant, and it requires atonement. There has to be atonement. And this is very important for believers to understand. We need to understand that judgment is coming for those breaking the blood covenant. Judgment is coming for those who have broken the blood covenant. You see, brothers and sisters, if you do not choose Messiah Yeshua as your Savior, if you break covenant with Him, if you backslide, brothers and sisters, judgment is coming. So the Levites are the ones now that get told and they get instructions to strap on their swords and to go out and to kill their fellow brothers. 3,000 of them get killed. Can you imagine? You see, brothers and sisters, what you need to understand is that there is a very stiff penalty and consequences for a broken blood covenant. Judgment takes place. And this is exactly what is happening here. The Levites are taken and they're standing on the side of the living, whereas the rest are standing on the side of judgment. And that is exactly what's going to happen in the end of days. The wheat and the tares shall be gathered. The one shall go to the fire and the other shall go to be with the Father. It's at this point, brothers and sisters, that because of their act of righteousness, the Levites then end up becoming the priests of this first covenant. Why? Because they repented. And we see this in trip number 6 and 7. You see, the forgiveness sought for and granted an alternative covenant arrangement, replacing the first set of stone tablets, which was called the law of Moses. This becomes the alternative agreement. This is when Yahweh institutes the fact that the Levites will now serve as priests, and that Moshe will have to do what? Write with his own hand the first 7 chapters of the book Leviticus. But this doesn't mean that this is a separate thing that should be just set aside. It is still all Yahweh's Torah. It's just that we need to understand this. It is a temporary solution until the one who comes will come. But that doesn't mean that we don't learn from the type and foreshadow. Now in trip number 6, it's found in Exodus chapter 32, 31 to 34, 34 verse 3. It's at this point that Moshe goes up to intercede for the breaking of the covenant. And Yahweh sends punishment. He sends punishment, and what we need to understand is that he rearranges the plan in trip number 7, as his forgiveness and grace is not to destroy them. We need to understand that, brothers and sisters, that Yahweh has now given, he's going to give the Levites as an act of grace. He could have just destroyed every single person. But because of Moshe's intercession, a type and foreshadow of Yeshua, he relents. So after narrowly escaping annihilation by their worshipping of the golden calf, thanks to Moshe and his intercession, and pleading the blood covenant promise made to their ancestor Abraham, it's at this point that Moshe goes up again to intercede for the people. He goes and he asks for forgiveness and to allow the people to continue into the land. And the truth is that it's at this point that Moshe is told, all who sinned against me will be blotted out of my book. And it's at this point that a plague struck the people. And Yahweh told the people to go into the land promised Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, their ancestors, but he, in other words, he, Abba Father, the bridegroom, will not go with them. Because if he did go with them, he would utterly destroy them. Now, it's very important here to see the heart of Yahweh, because this shows us why the next trip is completely different. It's a completely different agreement. And it's in this point that we need to understand that it's here that it makes Moshe the lawgiver. In other words, he is the one that will institute and officiate this law. And it's commonly called the law of Moshe. But it is all one Torah. This is what we need to understand. So the people are very sad to hear that he won't go with them. And they take off their idol ornaments. They take off all their jewelry. And you know, the entire point of getting married here, and the goal from the broken covenant with Adam in the garden, was so that Yahweh would dwell together with them, so that he would dwell among them, so that they may enter into this land promised by that covenant to Abraham and his descendants, and so that his presence may always abide with them. This original covenant offer was the fulfillment of the blood covenant spanning 400 years earlier, according to the terms and conditions promised to Abraham. This is the connection, brethren, that we need to make. You see, the land is the kingdom that we are supposed to dwell in the end of the age. It is the place that we are supposed to be for 1,000 years. It is the place where the faithful bride will be. We need to understand this. But at the same point, they didn't even make it fully through the wedding. They didn't even make it through the wedding, and they didn't even receive all of the wedding vows. It's at this point that Yahweh agrees then to send his messenger, which is Messiah Yeshua. He agrees to send their Messiah Yeshua to go before them, and Moshe is told at this point again to come up a 7th time. And this is where it is very important. Why is he told to come up a 7th time? To receive what? Isn't it that he's received everything already? No. This is very, very important. So Moshe separates himself as found in Exodus chapter 33, 12 to 18. And it says, "And Moshe said to Yahweh, See, you are saying to me, bring up this people, but you have not made known to me whom you will send with me. Though you have said, I know you by name, and you have also found favor in my eyes. And now please, if I have found favor in your eyes, please show me your way, and let me know you, so that I find favor in your eyes. And consider that this nation is your people." And he said, "My presence does go, and I shall give you rest." And he said to him, "If your presence is not going, do not lead us up from here. For how then shall it be known that I have found favor in your eyes, I and your people, except you go with us? Then we shall be distinguished, and I and your people, from all the people who are upon the face of the earth." And Yahweh said to Moshe, "Even this word you have spoken I shall do, for you have found favor in my eyes, and I know you by name." What an awesome statement. Then he said, "Please show me your esteem. Show me your glory." You see, it's at this point that Moshe then set up a tent outside the camp, and he separated himself from the people. And it's at this point that he goes and he enters into the tent of meeting, where he spoke face to face with Yahweh from that tent. And this was also the Messiah that he was speaking to from the tent, I believe. And because of Moshe's actions, the sixth time that he goes up and the persistence to ask Yahweh to show me your glory, it's at this point, brothers and sisters, that you need to understand that Yahweh actually transfers his glory, his image, which is something that we're supposed to be striving for. He transfers his image and authority to Moshe. Now look closely at Moshe's aggression to know this is the only way for his presence to continue to proceed. Then Yahweh granted it to him. He doesn't relent. He continues to ask. He asks for a very specific reason. It says the following. Then Moshe said to Yahweh, "See, you say to me, bring up these people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. Yet you have said, I know you by name, and you have also found grace in my sight. Now therefore I pray, if I have found grace in your sight, show me your way, that I may know you, and that I may find grace in your sight. And consider that this nation is your people." And he said, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." Then he said to him, "If your presence does not go with us, do not bring us up from here. For how then will it be known that your people and I have found grace in your sight, except you go with us? So we shall be separate, but your people and I from all the people who are upon the face of the earth." So Yahweh said to Moshe, "I will also do this thing that you have spoken, for you have found grace in my sight, and I know you by name." And he said, now take note, and he said, "Please show me your glory." And it's at this point that Moshe's request is granted, and he becomes the mediator. Why? Because he now has that image of Yahweh upon him. Exodus chapter 33, 19 to 23. You see, brothers and sisters, this is so important to understand. We need to be striving to walk in the image of Messiah Yeshua. When we have his image upon us, that is when we are able to walk in the righteousness of Elohim and be a faithful witness, become a magistrate that executes right ruling upon the earth on behalf of our Father. This is what Yahweh wants, and this, I believe, is what the final remnant is going to do. It says in Exodus 33, 19 to 23, "Then he said, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim the name of Yahweh before you. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But he said, You cannot see my face, for no man shall see me and live. And Yahweh said, Here is a place by me, and you shall stand on the rock. So it shall be while my glory passes by, that I will put you in the cleft of the rock, and will cover you with my hand while I pass by. Then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen." Now, brothers and sisters, it is at this point that we enter into trip number 7, which is found in Exodus chapter 34, Deuteronomy 9, 24 to 10 and verse 5. And it is also parts of the book of Leviticus, which is very, very important to understand. And this is what is commonly called, pardon me, let's go back a slide. This is what is commonly called the law of Moshe. It is commonly called the law of Moshe. And what we need to understand is that it is a temporary thing. Just the same as the priesthood was a temporary thing until Messiah Yeshua came, so too everything that Moshe is given, he is a temporary lawgiver for a time. This is very important. This covenant or this agreement is entered into with Moshe, and Moshe becomes lawgiver, and he receives the book of Leviticus, which included the sacrificial system. Why? Because now the people needed the sacrificial system in order to atone for every single sin, and they needed the priesthood to help them to be reconciled to Yahweh. This is the only thing, brothers and sisters, that was given over and above the original plan. So to make a distinction between book of the law, book of the covenant, you're stripping out so much of Yahweh's word for your own understanding. Instead of saying, like we have said from the very, very beginning, like the church has said for generations, like the Messianic movement has said for generations, the church just gets it a little bit wrong. The church says, well, all we need to do is keep the 10 Commandments, and then we don't do the sacrificial system because of Yeshua's death, and we are now the priests. But what they don't understand is that it's not just the 10 Commandments. It's the statutes, decrees, and judgments. It's the Torah within the Torah that we need to be keeping. The only thing that was added is here on the 7th trip, and it was added because of Yahweh's grace, because Moshe interceded on behalf of the people. So Moshe is now given this temporary covenant or this temporary plan called the sacrificial system. What? Until the time of the end. In other words, until Yeshua comes, who is the fulfillment of that pattern in the heavenlies. I don't know, people. I just don't understand. I don't understand, and so many people continually, those who hold to book of the covenant, book of the law, they will continue to press the thumbs down. They will continue to oppose these things, but they will not go and look at everything, from looking at the covenant teachings that we did, looking at to know him, looking at to the truth about this tabernacle, looking at all the things that have been presented, and then making a calculated decision based on the scriptures and based on the evidence. There cannot be a book of the law, book of the covenant distinction. It falls short of the truth found in Yahweh's word, and it strips away the truth of who Yeshua is and how he is the fulfillment of that tabernacle, how he fulfills everything. We are supposed to be keeping the Torah, everything. We are supposed to be keeping Yahweh's Torah, all of it. Not making a distinction in Yahweh's Torah that he never said that we are supposed to be doing, if that makes any sense. I really get upset about this because it's not found in the scriptures. So at this point on the 7th trip, it's here that Moshe carves out his own 2 sets of stone tablets as opposed to Yahweh carving out the first 2 tablets. And he goes up again for 40 days and 40 nights. And Yahweh writes the same covenant, the same terms and conditions, the same 10 words as the first set. But now the agreement is completely changed. Why? Because now we need to understand that now Moshe is made the mediator and the lawgiver. And the Levites become the priests to assist Aaron. Let me say that again. Moshe is made mediator and lawgiver. He's a temporary mediator now. And the Levites become the priests to assist Aaron. Another temporary thing. Furthermore, the other 11 tribes, they lose their firstborn status. And we're going to look at that as we go on. Maybe at a later stage, we will come to understand in teachings that I will do at a later stage, that Messiah Yeshua turns over all 3. He turns over the birthright. He turns over, it's the birthright, the priesthood, and multiplicity. He turns over every single one of those, and he reconciles us so that we can be the priests in the order of righteousness. Now, the other 11 tribes, they lose their firstborn status, as well as their proximity to the bridegroom, by losing their priesthood offer that was offered to them right in the very beginning, that was given to them in that original agreement that I said in the beginning when we saw the priesthood was around right there. Furthermore, the sacrificial system. This is a temporary sacrificial system. It is now instituted. And part of this agreement is written in the first 7 chapters of the book Leviticus. Go and read it for yourself. We have covered this in most of what we have been speaking. And again, this is so important to understand. It's all that is added is the sacrificial system and the priesthood. But taking those things away does not mean that we need to look at their type and foreshadow so that we can become the priests in the order of righteousness. It doesn't mean that we cut it out of Yahweh's word. It just means that it has been set aside, but it remains as a tutor, as a guardian, as a pointer to Messiah Yeshua, who is the living tabernacle. Furthermore, Leviticus is given on this 40-day trip, and we see the Feast of Trumpets and the Day of Atonement, which is added. It's added to the original 3 feasts, or the original 3 wedding anniversaries, and it's added for specific reasons, as they both have to do with the work of Messiah, who is the prophet to come after Moshe, who needs to fix everything when he comes. That is why it's so important. Now, furthermore, this law of Moses, or scripturally defined as the law that was added for transgressions, as so many people say, Galatians 3:19, or they call it the Schoolmaster. And it resulted, this giving of these things, the giving of the sacrificial system and the giving of the Levitical priesthood, resulted in a changing of the law as Messiah Yeshua came. He came and he changed the priesthood, resulting in a change of the law. What was that law? The law was that these priests, the Levites, would serve in the tabernacle for the people, on behalf of the people, until Messiah Yeshua came. And it has now been what? This whole thing, brothers and sisters, it has been overshadowed or superseded, pardon me, is the word, by Messiah Yeshua as our great high priest. We also need to understand, brothers and sisters, that this priesthood, as I've said in Hebrews chapter 7 and Hebrews chapter 9, the priesthood found in the Levites was an imperfect priesthood because it was dying. They were dying. There always had to be new priests, and they were dying. It could never stand and remain forever. That is why the priesthood of Messiah Yeshua, the Melchizedekian priesthood of Messiah Yeshua, is a far better priesthood because he is our eternal high priest. This law of Moses, as many people call it, or the book of the covenant, it is only the sacrificial system and the Levitical priesthood. That is why I keep calling it the schoolmaster or the guardian, because it was added to point people in the right direction because they were making so many mistakes. Furthermore, I need to stress this point, that it wasn't given because of their sins. It was given because of grace. It was given out of grace because Moshe went up the mountain to make intercession. It was given out of grace to help the people to come to a deeper understanding of the work of Messiah, so that they might become those priests in the order of righteousness. Now it's at this point that Moshe comes down the mountain with a second set of stone tablets, written with Yahweh's finger, and Moshe's face was veiled. Why? Because he now received the image of Yahweh. He's receiving that image, and he becomes the lawgiver of that which was given to him on the mountain. And the Bible says that the people cannot see his face. Because why? Because Yahweh's glory was shining through him. It's also important for us to understand that the book of Leviticus is given to Moshe during this final trip, or this, it's not the final, but the 7th trip. And it's also the statutes and decrees of the Levitical priesthood, of that which would be there as a guidepost until the promised prophet came, which is Messiah Yeshua. Also, we need to understand that the book of Leviticus was written by the hand of Moshe. Leviticus chapter 8:36 says that. Leviticus 10:11, Leviticus 26:46. Also, we need to remember that the stone tablets were written by the hand of Yahweh. And this is the distinction to be made in the New Testament writings of the difference between the law of Moshe and the law of Elohim. The one is the 10 words and all the Torah, whereas the other is that which was added. It is only the temporary priesthood and the sacrificial system. Yet it was all included into one sefer, one scroll. And brothers and sisters, we need to understand that by setting something aside or saying that it has been done away with, then we're saying that we don't need to understand the type and foreshadow, and thereby we become immature children. It's very, very important to understand. Brothers and sisters, I pray that in this teaching that you have come to understand that there is no true distinction found in Scripture called the Book of the Covenant, Book of the Law. Yes, in certain places it is written like that, but the Book of the Law is that which is being given, and it was only the sacrificial system and the priesthood. It's not what these teachers are teaching who teach the Book of the Covenant, Book of the Law. It is not that which is after Exodus chapter 24:12 onwards. That is not what it is. It is only the sacrificial system and the priesthood. And it was given out of grace until the promised Messiah would come, who would reconcile everything to the Father. Furthermore, as we have come to notice in this teaching too, that the type and foreshadow is the guardian. It is the schoolmaster pointing us to Yeshua. Why? Because he is the living tabernacle. And everything that the priest did, all the furnishings within the tabernacle point to Messiah Yeshua. And as we get into that in the next parts of this teaching, I pray that it will help you understand when we have a look at the altar, when you look at the laver, when we look at the menorah, specifically the menorah. Wow, there is so much symbolism found in the menorah. So brothers and sisters, I pray that this teaching has really spoken to you. I know that it was a lot of information to digest, but the purpose of this was to show you that Yahweh had given this shadow, this type and foreshadow, the pattern of the tabernacle before the sins happened, before the disagreements happened, before the people played the harlot with the golden calf. It's very, very important to understand that. That is why we still need to look into everything that is found in the wilderness tabernacle and thereby grow up and mature and become the people that Yahweh wants us to be. I pray that you'll join me for part 3 as we have a look at the importance of a shadow. And I'm looking forward to part 4, which I think is going to be the best of this teaching. It is going to be the meat of this teaching as we dig in to the furnishings of the tabernacle. And then in part 5, we will look at the Ark of the Testament, and we will look at the trespass offering, which I really, really enjoy. And I believe that it's something that many, many believers are not implementing in their life. And it's very, very important that we understand what the trespass offering is all about, and how now in the New Testament, or in this new covenant, if I have to put it that way, how do we implement this understanding of the trespass offering? How do we live as people, as Messiah Yeshua said when he came, forgive us our trespasses? What does that actually mean? So brothers and sisters, let's pray. Father Yahweh, I just want to thank you and praise you and honor you for this time that we could spend together. Father Yahweh, I know that it was a lot of information, but I pray in the name of Yeshua that each and every person that has come and listened to this teaching, Father, that they will go back and go over what is being presented. Father, as we build upon a foundation, I believe that the next parts of this series, Father, will make so much more sense. I want to pray today, Father, in the name of Yeshua, that every person, Father, that is truly seeking you in spirit and in truth, Father, that they will be so empowered by your Ruach, Father, that they will desire you and nothing more, and Father, that you will empower them and that you will raise them up in this generation, Father, to really be men and women of great zeal and great valor like Pinchas. Father Yahweh, we thank you that you are doing a great new thing upon this earth, and I pray in the name of Yeshua that you will raise up men and women that will be true priests, priests of righteousness, priests who bear the light of the kingdom of light within them. And we thank you for that. Abba Father, I thank you that you sent your Son, Messiah Yeshua, who is the way, the truth, and the life. He truly is the living tabernacle, reconciling us to you. As we yield to the working of your Ruach, as we surrender our lives on a daily basis, then we are restored and we are made new. And then we can become the people that you need us to be. So Father, I pray a blessing over each and every person. May they grow, may they mature, and may they live a life that reflects you in all that they do. In Yeshua's name we pray. Amen. I thank you for joining me, and I would like to urge you to please subscribe to this channel. Subscribe to the channel, like the videos if you choose, and I would also invite you to head over to our new website that has just been upgraded. It's still at www.treasuredinheritanceministry.com, where you can get all our teachings and download the notes, and where you can become a member, where you can join the community of other believers and really enjoy what is presented there. So again, thank you for joining me. I pray that you will meet me again for part 3 as we take a look at the importance of the shadow. May Yahweh bless you. May Yahweh keep you. May May Yahweh make his face to shine upon you and give you peace. Shalom.